So one of the decisions that we have to make as a nation, as a political body and entity, and as voters, is this issue of culture. On one hand, we want to say we're celebrating culture, celebrating diversity. Diversity brings richness. And on the other hand, we celebrate the Coca-Colanization of America, of the world, so much so that every place looks like every other place. I mean, one strip mall in Alabama looks like the same mall in Georgia, looks like the same mall in the Carolinas, on up through. Then you go to Indiana, then you go to Ohio, and you go to Illinois, and it all looks the same. And you go to New York, and you're like, wow, ain't that America? On the other hand, we do have regional diversity. It's a fact of life. I mean, it's a part of who we are. We do have, Southern characters with moral authority, East Coast people with old world chic, California folks with newfangled ideas, and the heartland. And that's just superficially who we are as a nation. We're redistributing ourselves along urban and rural lines, and color and color and color and color. I just watched Black Like Me last night, that movie about a real-life experience of a white man who crossed the color line. He darkened his skin and he's from Texas, and he had experience in the war, World War II, and then and lived in Europe. And I read from his bio, he was partially French, or somehow he lived in France for 4 years as an adult, and that was facilitated by him being able to speak French and work as a journalist in France. So this man came to the rural South, and he was exploited by all manner of people. I mean, he started not just being disgusted with white people, and as a journalist, he very clearly would articulate that he felt that the white people were malicious, violent, but this word malicious, this thing with intent kept coming up. So it was more than what he saw as a black man crossing that line. He felt it was more than circumstantial. The conditions of the day sort of forced people into being a certain way. What was interesting is that as he was a black person, the conditions forced him to be less trusting of people, less sure of himself. He sometimes cracked up. And finally somebody asked, ain't you been black your whole life? Why are you an adult and you're still having these insecurities about the existence and means of survival across racial lines? And but what he saw in white people specifically was a maliciousness, a viciousness. Even being sexually exploited. I use this example not because it's one of the worst examples, but it's used in the movie, interestingly, to say that he's just been exploited on every level. So he's late night, in this cafe, a black cafe. He's the only customer. The old woman there is telling him, finally he's gotten black people to speak honestly and openly to him. And he sees that they don't trust white people. He's seen the yes, yes, after being told that he should, he should call white people sir. And then be expected to go in the next breath and have a casual conversation with this person. After he's been, physically threatened with violence, people just running up on him, just to hurt him and literally just to harass him. So basically he describes this terrorism. He just feels sheer terror. And this black woman she's speaking to him as, matter-of-factly, not out of anger, not out of remorse, not even motherly or even out of comfort, but almost like, now that I say it, almost like comrades. And so there's a white man who comes in, and the white man is an educated white man. Of course, the educated white man claims to be really impressed with this journalist who's, tinted his skin black, he claims to be really impressed because he speaks, standard English and wants to interview him more. And this is basically, to cut a long story short, he lures him into his place where he's staying and tries to exploit him sexually. And I raised this example because it's one of the few examples of just gayness and queerness. And the guy goes on to say, I'm not a queer, after the black-white man pushes him away and says, I'm dedicated to my family and all that stuff. And there's been there are a few other scenes where he's been tempted to have sex with people outside of his marriage, which is one aspect that they explore. And of course, the white man tried to lure this black-white man into sex with him by saying, Negroes, there's proof that Negroes are sexually licentious and don't care, and they just want to, he's reclining and laying on his bed, and, and Negroes don't, and he's talking about all this data, bell curve type data that shows that Negroes are more sexually free than white people. And finally he just says, and you have bigger dicks, and prove it, and show me your dick. And so just looking at how we cross race lines back then and on screen, it is a farce for us to believe that culture doesn't matter, race doesn't matter. And so when we celebrate diversity, we're not just saying that we want to distance ourselves from that past and therefore we should forget it. We're saying, that's diversity on the cheap, and I listened to the Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Sotomayor. You thought I wasn't going to get back to it. It's all about the race line. And so we want to pretend like her experience doesn't matter. And it's insulting to me as a constituent of any of those suckers, especially my reps from the South, who want to challenge that race does matter. Even when people from the South, how dare you say that culture doesn't matter, that our culture has maintained racial lines. So like you saw in Black Like Me, like you see in every Hollywood imagination, we live segregated lives. And interestingly, the segregation not only provides a space for just different cultures to grow alongside each other, parallel to each other, for centuries, feeding off of one another, entertaining one another, providing all sorts of fodder for one another. It isn't as if we don't engage, there's no dialogue. Growing up as a minority in such a place, of course you discuss it at home. You have to, because you don't want people who hate or hateful situations or the products of hate to be the only place where you learn about your culture and for that to impact your identity. So you learn the good and bad and the ugly of race at home, if only to protect yourself. Another thing that came out with the Skip Gates case, there is no black parent who doesn't have that discussion about the police with their children, and particularly boys. So, in Black Like Me, the man confirmed what I had long suspected and learned about white people, and what also makes me uncomfortable about race is that there is this. He said you live with it. Every day you live with it, you know it. There's this, and now that he's black, in the movie, he is forced to see it in a very different way. But he said, of course, I was white and I knew it was there. And it just this kind of denial, and that just, it was like a tsunami inside of him.